Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, and I see Stacey is there actually, David.
Yes, Stacey is here. He's not in Wellington, but thank you. Tēnā rā tātou, ko tīmata anō. Nau mai, hara mai, ki tēnei hui, o te Komiti Maori, tuatahi he pānui. I'm just going to read out a little something regarding our live streaming and recording of this meeting. I'd like to remind councillors that the public section of this meeting is being recorded and live streaming. The webcast will be archived and made publicly available on the council's website within 2 days after each meeting for a period of 3 years. Our purpose is to provide greater access to council debate, decision making and encouraging openness and transparency. However, council accepts no liability for any individual opinions or statements. This is in accordance with council's live streaming and recording of meetings policy protocols, which can be viewed on our council website. I'd like to also remind all present that local government decision making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. Ka pai, kia ora koutou. Could you just make sure that your videos are turned on and your microphones are on when you're speaking? I will now formally open this hui by ka whiua te rākau kia koe, Councillor White, hei tūwhera tātou hui me te karakia. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou, e karakia poto mō tātou, kei noi tātou. He honore, he krori ki te atua, he maunga rongo ki te mato te whenua, he whakaaro pai ki ngā tāngata katoa. Hanga e te atua he ngā kauhau ki roto ki tēnei o mātou. Whakatonga o tō wairua tapu hei a whina hei tō i a mātou whiti whakaaro, whiti kōrero, i runga te kaupapa nui i mui a tātou i tēnei rā, ko hukarai te ko tō mātou kai whakaora. Amen.
Amen.
Kia ora, Councillor White. Apologies, nā hongia, we have Councillor Kevin Winters for lateness. He is submitting at the Rotorua Lakes Council. Is there any other apologies? No other apologies. Could I have a mover and a seconder to accept those, please? Yes. Kia ora, Councillor Clark. Councillor Rose, second. Okay, we move on to the public forum. Koutou mā, I'm going to declare a conflict of interest. The speaker in the public forum is a whanaunga of mine, talking about issues where I live, so I think it is best if I stand aside at this moment for the public forum as the chair. I'll hand the chair over to Councillor McDonald and for the public forum. Kia ora koutou.
Tēnā koe, Paki, kia koe?
Tēnā koutou me te mihinui atu mō tēnei wahana ko homa hia nei koutou ki te kōrero. Thank you for the opportunity. I understand I've only got 5 minutes, so I'll see how I go. By way of introduction, I come before you this morning as the Vice Chair of the Tua Council of Elders, which is a legal entity and charitable trust, and also the Chair of the Ruatoki Farms and Lands Trust Group, which actually administers 19,000 hectares approximately of indigenous lands, exotic lands and pastoral lands, and those letters have been sent to Regional Council previously. And I'm also the chair of the Tātai Whetū Trust, which has got huge problems as far as soil erosion is concerned. Now, this is an issue that we have been trying to get some understandings with Regional Council on since the 2017 flood. And a series of letters have all been written asking Regional Council to come and do their regulatory role of soil erosion and flood erosion works. But to date, none of that has been addressed. And I also wrote a letter on the 24th of July 2018 to Paula Chapman and Bruce Crabb to tell them that the cost of that reinstatement, loss of land and loss of production actually cost our trust $1,754,000. Now, we don't want to be faced with that sort of problem again. So another letter also was written on the 12th of April 2021, and that was addressed to Fiona McTavish, Doug Leader, kia ora koe Doug, I see him sitting there, and Kataraina Belshaw. And just a short extract of that letter says, I therefore advise you that the following hapu have removed themselves from Te Uru Tamatua and Te Komiti Oruna tribal. And those hapus are Taurau Marae Ngāti Rono hapu, Waikirikiri Marae Hamua hapu, Pūtere Marae Ngāti Mura hapu, Nāhina Marae Ngāti Tāwhaki hapu. Now all those hapus are in Rātohi, and the other ones are Rāroa Marae Tamaruarani hapu in Waimana, Auhau Marae Ngāti Hakapatu Auhau Marae in Waiohau, and Maunga Pōhatu Tamakai Moana hapu. So that's a total of 7 hapu at the moment that don't sit under the jurisdiction of post-settlement governance entity or the tribal. And we therefore notify you that the Tua post-settlement governance entity, which is TAT, do not represent us in any matters, but their hapu will retain their autonomy as accorded to us under the Declaration of Independence and Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So we are saying that we want the Regional Council to recognise our rights as private landowners, because I sent a request to, under the Official Information Act, to the Deputy General of Department of Conservation to see whether the post-settlement governance entity now overrides private landowners or not. And the letter came back and they said, no, it does not. And that was also supported by Jim Bolger and a whole lot of other Crown officials. But for some unknown reason, the Regional Council is still recognising that every authority has been a stakeholder on our lands. And we're saying, no, they're not. We will only recognise service suppliers, because stakeholders is a term under the Resource Management Act that we don't recognise. And we are asking Regional Council to come and do your job, to do the flood erosion works on our private lands. So that's that first issue. The second one is riparian margin plantings. I know riparian margin plantings is a huge answer for flood erosion, but in Rātoki itself has always been an issue because of the amount of horses that are there that keep debarking all the trees and all that. So it makes it hard to do in Rātoki. But I also manage a farm here in Tāneatua that has got 2.5 kilometres of riparian margins that need to be done. And I've asked Regional Council for assistance to do that. And then the answer comes back, no, they have to wait for Te Uru Tamatua to agree. But I mean, this thing is beneficial for all of us. So why aren't they agreeing to it? So that's that other issue. And the last one is gravel consents. We held the gravel consent under Tua Pūtaiao Trust for 10 years. Then it came up for review. Then it was transferred over to myself. Now, I've got no problem in not doing any gravel extractions. It was always done under the guidance and authorization of Regional Council anyway. But I'm waiting for somebody to come up with a plan on how are we going to manage this river going forward. Because as you see, you may have seen this document here, which is Te Uru Tamatua Annual Plan, which is just a comic strip as far as I'm concerned, which defames people like ourselves that done a lot of community work and environmental alignment work in conjunction with all the local bodies and the government agencies. And we had good go forward at that time, but once post-settlements came, it just stopped. So I'm asking you to recognize us as private landowners, because I had an annual general meeting of my beneficiaries on Saturday, and all this was highlighted before them. And we've only got three options. Either the regional council comes in and does their job, or Te Uru Taumata is going to do it, and we need to see what the plan is, because at the moment, I've got all the access agreements to the river in Ruatoki. So if they can't get to the river, how are they going to fix the problem? And the third option is we're going to do it ourselves. And we'll never get it to the standard that regional council can do anyway, but we're locked between a rock and a hard place, because since the 2017 flood, traditionally, floods hit us between 4 to 6 years every time, and we're just about due for one now. And it's only through good luck rather than good management that we haven't been hit so far. So I'm asking regional council, again, can you please come and do your regulatory duty? And we want to know by the end of this month, because I've got a meeting at the end of the month with the adjacent landowners to where we are. And if we get agreement there, then we're just going to go in and do it. And to finish off, because of this constant overriding and undermining of private landowner rights, I stopped our trust from paying the regional council rates, and that's happened for 2 years now. We are more than prepared to pay our rates, but if you don't do your job, why are we paying rates? So those rates actually total to about $28,000 now. And if I don't get a decision from regional council by the end of this month, we are going to spend that $28,000 and get in there and do it ourselves. So sorry to be blunt, but those are the issues that I had to bring to you this morning. And I really hope that we can get some go forward, because ever since settlement, we've had nothing. So that's all I wanted to say. I tēnei hui. Nā reira, kia ora koutou.
Well, tēnā koe Paki, I te rangatira, a mō tō kōrero. I'll defer to the chair, then I'll make a comment. Kia ora, Mati Moana, kei a koe tēnā.
Okay.
And by the way, you're making a lot of noise in my tātou room. There's lots of squeaking and shuffling going on. We can hear it coming through. It's distracting.
Tēnā koe Paki, ngā mihi tia koe mō tō kōrero kia mātou. So thank you, Paki, for your kōrero. Look, we hear you loud and clear, Paki. We understand our obligation to liaise and communicate with private landowners. Our meeting this morning is not to get into, I guess, the internal politics of Tūhoe. This is not the environment for that discussion. However, we take on board what you are saying, and we acknowledge what we are saying, and acknowledge the necessity for the regional council to engage with private landowners on issues that you have raised within Komiti Maori. So our staff are here, our staff taking your kōrero on board. I understand there will be a meeting with you, with operational staff, regulatory staff, to talk about those issues that you're talking about. So hopefully, Paki, that's what you're wanting to hear from us, that we acknowledge what you've spoken to us about today, and that we will contact you through the proper channels to engage with you as private landowners to deal with the addressing issues that you've raised.
Yeah, well, it's been a long time coming, because all the letters that get written and all that doesn't just falls on deaf ears. Nobody wants to do anything about it. And this is why I'm saying, if we don't get some sort of constructive plan moving forward by the end of this month, then we're going to have to go in there and do it. Because I don't want to be faced with another huge bill again on reinstatements of our lands.
On my Paki, we're having some technical issues. I did catch the last of your kōrero. Can you just repeat, for me what you had said at the beginning of your kōrero?
What I'm saying is, there's any amount of letters that have been written to Regional Council over the last 4 years, requesting Regional Council to come and do their job. I've actually invited them to come on our lands, because I'm saying the Iwi Authority and Tribal are not stakeholders on our lands. And you are the people that we're paying the rates to do the job. So I'm waiting for you to come and do it. So it's all just fallen on deaf ears. That's why we have to make the call ourselves, that if nothing happens by the end of this month, then we're going to have to get in there and do it ourselves.
Kei te pai tēnā. Most of the councillors here now have heard your kōrero, so we're all on board as full council now, what you have told us. So we'll keep a watching brief on where our staff will be meeting with you and the outcomes of those meetings, and ensure that there is a way forward for you working with Regional Council.
Okay, goodbye.
And we'll keep a watching brief on what's happening in that space.
Yeah. All right. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Paki. Could I just acknowledge your efforts and mahi in this particular issue? You're consistent. I have personally been out to look at the issues that your collective and your trust have suffered as a result of the erosion. And yes, you've had multiple meetings with staff. I've got one question. Have you and your collective group of hapu taken this discussion to TAC?
We've actually been blocked out from meeting with them. They just totally disregard us as having any sort of authority whatsoever. So it becomes a total waste of time, Doug. And we've actually got letters that say that.
Okay, thank you, Paki. Therein, I think, lies the problem. So this is not an easy issue to resolve, but as Mati Moana said, I think we'll go through another round with the executive, and hopefully at the regional council level, we can commence more kōrero with the PSG.
Yeah. Okay, but as I'm saying, we've got up to the end of the month, because a flood could hit us tomorrow, and then we go faced with another huge problem. As you know, Doug, that rock wall that was put in there is a huge asset, and it's been undermining since 2017, and we don't want to lose it.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Councillor White, you've got your hand up.
Yes, kia ora, tēnā koe te rangatira Paki mō tō kōrero ki a mātou te rangatira. I certainly personally totally hear what you're saying, and I think it's that tension between the rights of the landowners and the rights of institutions that get themselves together, and the difficulty of maintaining open communication. So I hear that, and obviously there's internal issues for the tribe to look at and resolve. But I hear also the fact that you have a genuine desire to repair some of the challenges your own landowners are facing right now, and progress isn't happening. I support what Mati Moana has said, and that is really our operational staff need now to get their heads together and look at how we might work this through, and how those recommendations and opportunities for change might come through to our council. That needs to happen. Hear your frustration and the timelines that you expect now. Following, from your perspective, all the delays that have happened and the deaf ears that have been not tuning in. That said, I think it's made clear, Paki, that our group will get onto it, and in due course our council will hear what those recommendations are. So I guess that's on the assurance I can certainly give you from a constituency and a council perspective, and support. Yeah, as I said, what Monty Mine is saying, and certainly hear you, Paki. Your corridor resonates for those landowners out there that have direct problems that they need to get fixed. So that's the issue for us as well, to listen to what you've got to say and see what we can do in that space with the resources that we have. Kia ora e hoa.
Ka pai, Tari. And I think just a final comment is, I think at some point, regional council has to make the decision. Who do you service? Do you service the private landowners in the first instance, or do you listen to a post-settlement governance entity? Hey. And that's the thing that needs to be cleared up. Yeah. All right. Thank you for your time.
Kia ora. Thank you, Paki.
Okay. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you. I'll hand back to Toi.
Kia ora tātou. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 4, ngā take tōmuri. Agenda item not on the agenda, we had none advised. Declarations of conflicts of interest. No, okay, moving on. Minutes of our last meeting, I will take that as read. Could I have a mover and seconder for those? We have Councillor Rose, Councillor McDonald, second. Any matters arising from those minutes? No? Okay, thank you. Moving on to our reports. We are now going to move it, hand it over to, yes, Mark Lecomte, who's going to discuss rates, remissions and postponements. Kia ora, Mark.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we should have Huarau Stewart in the audience. She's very kindly offered to provide us some advice on rates, remissions and postponements and development of Maori freehold land. She works for Te Punakokori and is very experienced through development of whenua, working for the Maori Land Court, working through various charters, accountancies and management consultancies, and involvement with the Te Ture Whenua Maori Act. So very glad to have some of her offer of support and advice to us in this kōrero. On the revisions on Maori and postponements on Maori freehold land, we've already had a first councillor workshop where we discussed some general types of remissions that may be appropriate. The key part for discussion today is our approach to engaging with the some 5,500 blocks of Maori freehold land. What we are proposing is that we take a targeted approach to form some focus groups right now so that we can get to start to ground truth some of the issues. And that will be representative of both small, medium and large blocks of land and also across various districts, so we can have a representative view of the issues that are being faced on the ground. That would then be used to inform our draft policy prior to full consultation next year. So we're forming that working group, working with TPK, working with some of the local councils, rate specialists, looking to form focus groups from the Maori freehold land governors to understand their particular views and particular interests to further develop the draft policy and proposal. I just want to get any general guidance, direction on whether that's the appropriate approach or any particular people we should be involving.
Kia ora, Mark. Do we have any questions for Mark? No, it seems really straightforward because it's quite early days here, Mark, and you know what you're asking us to consider. I'm happy to move the recommendations. I will second it here with Councillor Rose. Now open for discussion. No discussion needed. You can carry. Is there?
Yeah, Te Taru here. Look, is Huirau? What was Huirau going to be presenting? Is she going to be following on from you, Mark? I'm just a bit confused.
So Hiro isn't actually here to present. She's just here to listen into the kōrero, but she can answer specific questions. She is an expert in development of Maori freehold land who is acting as an advisor to us at the moment. And we're looking for some advice from her on the type of issues she's seeing in development, making sure that we align with TPK's work so that we are trying to bring together a suite of all the supports, and just to make sure we're acting in an integrated manner. She's already offered us the potential for some people who are specialists in the Te Ture Whenua Maori Act, where I've read it and tried to understand the intent. She's actually putting us in touch with people that have drafted it. So she's really a source of some expert advice for us.
Or maybe I'd be interested, Mr. Chair, in just maybe hearing just any key points that you'd like to share with us, Huiaro, just in advance of getting more sort of detailed commentary from our own staff at some point. So do you have any immediate thoughts that you could give to us that we need to prepare for?
At this stage, it's really hard to kind of look at it, because in our rohe we've got a whole lot of unproductive land, and the last thing we want to do is kind of cut our nose off to spite our face. So whatever approach we do have would need to take an equity lens. And when I say equity, I mean allowing whenua Māori to be developed should whānau want to, but not in a way that's going to create another barrier. So really, really keen to look at it from an angle that take European title out and look at it from a whenua Māori perspective in a holistic way. So those are kind of my initial thoughts at this stage, but until we get I guess a bigger picture of what we're dealing with, we'll be able to kind of delve down into the detail.
I've just got a question here from Councillor Chairman Leader.
Thank you, Chair. Look, it's just by way of getting explanation on the legislative framework. So when I'm looking at the papers in front of us, under 1.1, can you just help me? We are talking about a legislative framework regarding under the Local Government Act and the Te Ture Whenua Māori Land Act. It says councils must have a policy on remission and postponement of rates on Māori freehold land. Is that a singular request? And where does it mean when it says we may have policies on rates, remissions and rates postponements? Is that a plural in terms of the singular, or does that second tranche belong to the LGA in terms of other than Māori land?
Okay.
It's just not quite clear.
Yeah. Okay, so to explain that, we must have policies on remissions and postponement for Māori freehold land. The policy could be as simple as saying we don't have such things to we do have such things. So yes, we must have a policy that outlines what rates we would remit or postpone on Māori freehold land. We may have policies that apply to general land. So we're not required to have policies for sports grounds, for general hardship, those types of grounds, but we legally must have a policy that outlines our position on rates, remissions and postponements for Māori freehold land.
Okay, thank you, that's clear.
Councillor Clark.
Kia ora, Mark. I noticed in the report we actually detail the rate remissions policies of the respective TLAs across our rohi. Are they all consistently aligned all the way through their policies? Being that we would have to adopt policies, and if there's inconsistency between say Rotorua and Podiki, based on the question, are there any consistencies, or are they basically generic policies that apply right across the rohi?
The short answer, Councillor, is there are inconsistencies between the current policies.
And how do we rectify those? I mean, where do we get our consistency from there?
So there are several things we need to do, and we are acting under new legislation or updated legislation in this regard. So one of the principles we talked about at the workshop is how far do we go in terms of no one worse off versus being true to our community outcomes. So this is a process where we are collecting more data to understand the remissions and postponements that are currently in place, analysing why we have those and see how they line up for us. At the moment, the biggest potential change, and I don't have a quantum to put around it, is if you recall at our workshop, we discussed whether we would continue to apply remissions after a housing development or economic development on on Maori freehold land. There are councils that do provide a remission for up to 5 years on a partial basis after development. So there will be some areas where we may be less generous than currently, but we just need the ground truth that to really understand the value, the number of properties affected, and to be in a position to recommend which way to go.
Councillor Clark, Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora, Mark. Just one question. At our workshop, when we talked about rate remission at our workshop, we talked about rate remission on both general title and Maori title land, correct?
Yep. Correct.
So when we, in looking at developing a remission postponement rates policy on Maori land, will we just be looking at Maori land for this project, or is it your intention to look at both general and Maori land?
So this project does require us to look at both. We need to, so things like the general financial hardship criteria would apply across general land and Maori freehold land. We're seeking specific guidance at this workshop about engaging with the Maori freehold land governors, and we are completely open that any general remissions that apply would also apply across Maori freehold land as well. So there is a certain level of crossover.
Yeah, I do have another question. My other question is, given that this is going to be quite a big project, because we're looking across the whole region, is there consideration to, attack the methodology and the process that we use? And this is probably a question for Huero as well. Will we consider to look at first at a sub-regional, on a sub-regional basis, then also look into the policies around those TLAs within those sub-regional regions to help us paint the picture, so we're not reinventing the wheel in the development of our own policy?
So perhaps if I can answer the first part about development of policy and then hand over to Hiro for any comments. We've already done the policy work looking at what the current policies are across the district, analyse across the region, analysing what's consistent, what's not consistent, and we had some direction about on some of the key issues we needed to resolve. So we've done that from a very top-down legislative written document perspective. Our key next step is really understanding the ground truth. What is the situation on the ground and what is fit for our rohi? So, and that's where Hiro and some of the contractors we're going to bring in will bring the expertise that I don't have about the specific issues on whenua Maori. Is there anything you'd like to add, Hiro?
Yeah, just adding to that, that's exactly what I was thinking as well. I would be bringing a lens from whānau development, basically from what I've seen in the community, and looking at it from that practical perspective and making sure it's fit for purpose. So, I mean, we don't intend to reinvent the wheel. We just intend to strengthen and make sure it's doing the job that we want it to do without actually, I guess, jeopardizing anyone in any way.
Just one quick one. Our policies, are they consistent with the aspirations of post-treaty settlement entities? Have we had any feedback in that context? I guess to a certain extent I'm thinking about Tūhoe that has said it doesn't acknowledge some of the trusts that have been created by the land court. Do we have any potential conflict there, or we perceive we made it?
I can't really speak for Tūhoe, but I mean, what I can say is that if we look around the region, development is very poor, which signals to me that there's some sort of barrier in the way. I've just gone through an exercise looking at our district plans, and that's one part that we've identified. District plans are inconsistent. What that means is planners, they don't like to touch whenua Māori. So, I mean, when I think about the whole scale of it from one end to the other, there are barriers all along the way. And my view on this is that we would like to, well, from a whānau perspective and from a landowner and a trustee perspective, the more we can work together, the better it will be. In terms of what your guys' policies are and whether or not they're consistent, I can't really comment on that yet because I haven't seen them yet. But I can comment on what I do know is that our whenua and our rohe is hugely unproductive, and I would put my hat on it's because there are barriers in the way and money isn't the only one. So the other thing is probably policy.
Kia ora, Councillor Clark. Councillor Neves.
Thank you. You may not be able to answer my question, who you're wrong. Sorry, apologise for my pronunciation. If you haven't seen the specific policies of the different TLAs, just following on from Councillor Clark, we're not starting from a clean slate, and we've noted these inconsistencies between the different policies of the different TLAs. I just wanted to check that they are all compliant with the requirements of the legislation, that there's nothing in any of the current policies in the TLAs that should not be there, because we'll be reviewing them obviously and considering whether or not portions of them should be included in ours.
That will probably be part of the process, checking to look to see if they're compliant in the first instance and then looking for inconsistencies before we change. So that will be part of what we go through to make sure that we're up to speed.
I just like to say I do support the approach, Mark. It seems like a very sensible way forward.
Kia ora, Councillor Neves. Councillor Crosby.
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Just some observations, if I can make them. One, I do support the approach. I think it's a good way to start from the ground truthing point of view. That will more than likely lead to some modelling, and within that modelling, it might demonstrate some quite significant discrepancies. And having gone through a number of these reviews in the past, I would suggest that if you're at that point, that you also consider transition timeframes, and also lastly, but very importantly, be alert to perverse incentives which can flow out of any rating review.
Kia ora, Councillor Crosby. Councillor Bryan.
Yeah, my concern is around the inconsistencies between the TAs, which then defines that we will be inconsistent if we have a one policy for all. So how are we going to handle that? And would it not possibly be advisable to just follow the policies of the relevant TAs so that we don't confuse our constituents involved?
So that is one option to look at. Part of that is understanding the level of the change that is required and how often those remissions are applied to see the delta. As Councillor Crosby mentioned, the transition is one of the really keys on how this goes through. We would not want to do a sudden snap change that disadvantages or dramatically advantages one party over another compared to historical decisions. So I guess the key thing is here is we're moving from rates being collected from the TLAs on our behalf, and that's where we have historically been applying all these different policies, which leads to inconsistency not just on the Maori freehold land, but across all the various types of rates remissions we have. We need to strike the right balance between consistency, between transition, and between the sub-regional needs. And while I've got views from a pure paper policy perspective, the ground truthing is a real next step in understanding are some of those differences in policy actually justified on the ground? What values, dollar values, and number of people are we talking about to see how big a transition issue we may or may not have?
Kia ora, Mark. Kia ora, Councillor Bryan. Any other questions?
Yeah, Te Taru here. I've got my hand up, Toy.
Oh, yeah. Kia ora.
So look, I just want to acknowledge Mark and the team for reaching out to the likes of Huiro and TPK to provide that sense of ground proofing. I really like what Huiaro has said, really understanding the intricacies of Māori land. It's the barriers that are there. And there'll be core issues that are reflected right across the motu about those barriers. So there is a consistency in that, one that we understand the difficulty of developing Māori land. The fact of the matter that policy has restrained a lot of that. As she said, it's not necessarily about money, but the constraints that Māori land are under. And so I really do appreciate the fact that she's there and helping to groundproof and really to refine those core consistencies, because they are there. And the differences that are, it's a bit like an onion peel. As you go out, there'll be differences that we can potentially live with and understand, but those core consistencies, if we anchor those, and I think that puts us on the right path. So congratulations, Mark and the team, and thank you, Huiaro, for hooking up.
Mihi.
Kia ora, Councillor White. Yeah, I'd like to echo those sentiments. Kia ora, Mark. This, as Denise said, this is a really sensible approach. So congratulations to you and the team, and thank you, Huiaro, for coming along. And I'm heartened to see some cross-agency collaboration with you being at Te Komiti and to have you here with Komiti Māori today. Koe anō koutou, the motion has been seconded to support these recommendations. I'll put it to the vote. All against? Paul, sorry. Paul, raise your hand. Against? Motion carried. Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Mark.
Got it.
Okay, we're going to move on to the chairperson's report and pass it over to Katarana. Go ahead, Katarana.
Tēnā koutou nā kaukauhira, o toi moana, tēnā hoki koutou katoa. I will present this report on behalf of our chair today, and if you look at page 43, for those that have an agenda. This chairperson's report is a snapshot of some matters of interest, and I'll just draw your attention to item 1, which is the Future Local Government Review interim report that's recently been released. It was released in September. It's called Arewa Ake Te Kaupapa, Raising the Platform. That is an interim report done by the Local Government Review Panel. And just for your interests, a local from the Bay of Plenty is on that review panel. His name is Mr. Antoine Coffin. Some of us will know him. He's got many years of experience in this space. That's a process that will involve tangata whenua, hapu and iwi consultation. They are open to consulting with hapu and iwi and tangata whenua through their process. Public consultation will be carried out in September next year. If we just go to the second item, item 3, updates on the Marine and Coastal Area Act, known as Tapu Kaimoana or the MACA. We've had a recent, as recent as last week, a decision from the court to grant a customary marine title to an application for 5 hapu and iwi for what they call rangataua. It's called Te Tahu or rangataua, and that is on behalf of Ngā Pōtiki, Ngāti Here, Ngāti Tapu, Ngāi Tukoe and Ngāti Pukenga, that was led by Colin Reader. That determination, that decision was made last week. It grants him that. There is some process before that is finalised, and Council's legal team and also our coastal planner will be looking at what the implications may be for our council in that space. So that will be taken to a strategy and policy meeting in the very near future. And as you may be aware, prior to that, there was a decision on Edwards consent. Sorry, they were accorded a protected customary right, and that process is ongoing as well. You will see that we have many of these applications in the Bay of Plenty region. These are the first two in our region, but there will be more hearings coming up. So if we go to the next item about civil defence emergency management.
Pardon?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, questions, anyone on that?
No. Yeah, I'm just, the status of the Edwards case, knowing that it's actually under appeal, who are the appellants and how long will that process kind of take? I mean, surely the legislation is not completely clear until that appeal process has been resolved. I'm just sort of confused how another process around Tauranga Moana has actually been put in place when the Edwards appeal, which I thought was somewhat presidential, is still under review or under appeal. Can you put some clarity in that space?
Quite correct, it is under appeal. I think we may have Rachel Boyd, who is our legal counsel here, who would be far better answering, and Stacey here, our coastal planner. So did you hear that question, Waihema, that part from Councillor Clark?
Yes, so through the chair, there have been 7 appeals on the Edwards decision. At the moment, the court is dealing, so that's to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal is dealing with some interlocutory applications. So some parties have applied to strike out other parties' appeals. And so that hearing on those interlocutory applications will be at the end of November. So we are looking at quite a long process because that's only the first stage. And then once the court has decided who can proceed with the appeals and who can't, we'll go to a substantive hearing. So unlikely to be, I would have thought, in the next 6 months or so, but we'll wait to see what indications the Court of Appeal gives about that at the close of that interlocutory hearing. But the High Court is going to proceed to hear the stage 2 of that process at this stage in February next year. So they're not going to put anything on hold to await the outcome of those appeals. They'll continue. That February hearing is going to be about the actual boundaries of the customary marine title being granted and the contents of the draft orders. So in relation to protected customary rights, it's things like what's the scale of the activity? Are there any limitations on the exercise of those activities? So we will be involved in that hearing next year, and it will continue, and so will the other applications, notwithstanding those appeals. And stage 2 of Ngā Pōtiki, so re-reader, is being heard now in Papamoa. So that's in week 3, I think, of 6 weeks. So everything is still continuing.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Stacey? Okay, all right. Kia ora, Councillor Neves.
Thank you. So stage 2's being heard. There's that for the Rangatawa decision. So is that stage 2 going to also outline the area, the specific boundaries for Rangatawa customary marine title area? Because the map that was attached to the judgment was very unclear whether it was just the area of Rangatawa Bay that went from the bridge into the bay and whether it went up to Mean High Springs. It was very difficult to follow, so very hard to understand the implications. So is that going to be finalised as part of the stage 2 hearings?
No, so it won't, and it's a little bit confusing with stage 1 and stage 2 of the different proceedings. But so the re-reader application was split into 2. So Rangatawa Bay had a group of working party applicants that were collaborating, and so there was quite a lot of agreement and no opposition to those orders being made. So that's been dealt with, but there'll also potentially be a further hearing in relation to Rangatawa Bay around wahitapu, which areas might be wahitapu, and the exact boundaries of that CMT. So we're just waiting to hear further on that. Stage 2 of the reader application is the more contentious one. It's the one out offshore of Omanu. And I can't recall, sorry, where it goes down the coast, but I think there is some more information coming out at the end of the week for you and your update. And that has a lot of overlapping claims. It includes Motiti Island. So there are like 15 different groups or something involved in that one. So that will be, so it's quite separate to Rangatawa Bay.
All right, kia ora. Councillor Nicole?
Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand the boundary change for Te Tahuna or Rangatawa is, the boundary is going to be changed from the original application that was made by Ngā Pōtiki, which was Ngā Pōtiki had identified the boundary from the Mangatapu Bridge further into the Tahuna. My understanding now is moving from the bridge to include the area in front of Mangatapu Marae out to a land block or land area called Ahipotu, which carries it out almost to the mouth of where the Tahuna joins into the wider inland harbour, is my understanding.
Yes, I think that is correct. So during the hearing, the application area was extended out further past the bridge and in front of the marae. And that was agreed to by all parties. There was no opposition. So what the court has granted is that area, TMT over that area. And there is a map that I've included in the update that will be circulated. That was in the decision. Again, it's not 100% clear, but that shows where it's gone to the, I guess, to the left of the bridge.
Kapai, kia ora. Any other questions around Mecca? No, kapai, haere tēnei. Kia ora kōrua.
Okay, moving along, Koto. In terms of emergency management, just highlighting on page 47 that we have a He Kahu He Tonga Tonga, which is a strategy developed by Stuart Marama MacDonald. That's been rolled out in Tauranga, and there's intentions of rolling out that strategy across the region. However, COVID has put that on pause for a little while. So that's just a brief update here. Essential freshwater, we've had several workshops and presentations on our engagement with Tāngata Whenua on freshwater to implement the NPSFM, National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management. And we have Te Hononga as our document that's guiding that engagement. I don't think we need to, unless there's any questions on that from our councillors. I can move on. Just in terms of our climate change updates, councillors will be aware that we have a fund available for hapu and iwi who are grappling with the implications or the potential for the effects of climate change on marae communities, Papakainga and such like. And our council has a fund available for hapu and iwi to access, to maybe do some research and study on that. And just to note that our climate change action plan was approved, revised and approved on the 4th of August at our strategy and policy committee meeting.
Just got a question from Councillor Gross.
Yeah, just wondering if staff have been in contact with Katikuku in Tauranga Moana in regards to the news article that was out at the start of the week in regards to having to retreat, potential retreat from Whareroa Marae. has there been any discussion in and around that, and how do we, as a council, believe that this fund could help in that regard?
Thank you, Councillor Rose. I did read the article myself. I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get back to you. I'll definitely contact the relevant staff. Okay, and just finally, we thought it might be useful to capture some of the rich kōrero that we were presented with at our last Komiti Maori, and addressed by Nanaia Mahuta, and she came and visited us and presented and interacted and engaged with our community at our marae at the last meeting, and her kōrero is on page 52, and just to draw your attention that a lot of her wise words are going to be incorporated into some of our mahi. And that is, I believe, the Chair's updated report.
Just an observation. I mean, I'm very impressed by Ms. Martin's kōrero, and just looking at point 5, which I kind of read to wonder what sort of spin we're putting on. It's kind of recognise accountability of enduring better outcomes for Maori voices, enabling Maori and ethnic inclusion to bring greater diversity and innovative solutions. I mean, I think that's been quite enabling, but just wondering what specific ethnic inclusion does that include? Our Asian, Indian, etc., minorities, immigrants, and that ethnicity, that widest thing. Just an interesting point to pick up, and what was a very Maori-centric statement to include other ethnicities in the inclusive state, and what does that mean going forward? Just an interesting point. I'm sure someone will pick up on that quickly. In terms of rights and obligations. So I don't know where we go with that, but I just noted that that's an interesting inclusion statement.
Councillor Clark, maybe a mention towards diversity, perhaps, in our communities. So could I please have a mover and a seconder to accept this for the Chairman's report? Councillor Thurston, Councillor Chairman Leader second, for, against, carried. Kia ora. Partnerships with Maori statement, which is Matthew Mana.
Kia ora, anō koutou. Draw your attention to page 64 of our agenda. You will recall at our last committee on the 17th of August that Komiti Maori approved the partnerships with Maori statement. This is just a brief update for our councillors to just highlight some of the mahi that is underway to give effect to that Maori partnerships statement. I've outlined some of our key decisions made to lead to where we are today, bullet point 3, and I've included a snapshot of some internal mahi that we're doing across the organisations in our various groups and teams. That's item 4.1 in our agenda. There is a lot going on at different levels. So this is a snapshot, it's not everything and it's not detailed. That will come in the program and action plan that we are developing. So I've just put this in to just let you know that we are working on these things. We will come with an action plan and a program, and that we will be reporting to Komiti Maori on a regular basis and also to other committees of council. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Lees.
Thank you. I appreciate getting this detailed summary, but some of the points were a little bit cryptic for me, and if it's possible, I'd just like a little bit more clarification. On page 67, we talk about a co-lead on climate change. What does that mean? I've got a number of these questions. If you could just perhaps answer that one.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. What that means in terms of the context of Māori partnerships is where there is opportunity, they want to co-lead the development of documents or plans for marae and such like. It is a bit vague, Councillor Nees, and that is the detail that we're delving into in terms of the partnerships for Māori. So we're looking at opportunities where we can co-lead with Māori in a climate change space.
I suggest that might be quite difficult given the diversity of views in the Maori space. The other question I have is exploring regional iwi governance options. That's on page 68. What does that mean? Is that code for getting collaborations of tangata whenua entities together to work on major issues?
Sorry, Councillor Nees, which page was that on?
Page 68.
Oh, there we are. I've got it right at the top bullet point. Yes, so a lot of the tangata whenua in iwi at a regional level are seeking some opportunities to meet and to have collectives as a bit of think tank kind of expertise, and it's just we're exploring what that means for them and for us. Councillor White was involved in a recent meeting where some of this was discussed about the potential for a regional iwi leaders / influencers group. And this is some Māori, hapu and iwi leaders that have asked us to support an iwi-led entity. It's very, very early days. We don't have any details, unless Councillor White wants to elaborate on that one.
That's a good idea. Councillor White.
Oh. Yeah, sorry?
Just further to the explore regional iwi governance options. Can I just say first that it's my understanding, as Hatarang was saying, that because we have such a large volume of unique Māori, hapu and iwi, can we find a way to find natural alliances so that we don't have to go through so many places? And one model we were looking at was waka, Te Arawa waka, Mātātua waka, Takitimu. But I'll hand it over to you, Councillor White, just to talk about your, because Te Arawa is looking to potentially lead this out.
Yeah, no, and if I can just reflect just briefly on Councillor Nee's comments around the comments around climate change. Te Arawa have already done their climate change plan. The intention is not to follow, but to co-lead. And to co-lead is to have your plan ready and your strategies ready. And of course, James Shaw actually put a message back, and he's going over to the climate change conference overseas internationally, and I was really impressed by that. And the whole issue is not just to have an impressive document, but be prepared from a tribal point of view and a collective tribal point of view with the challenges that are coming ahead. So co-lead means being co-prepared, and actually iwi taking a leadership within their own right, within their own tribal jurisdiction, to put a point across. And in that respect, sit side by side for the likes of regional council and others in the conversation. So that's about sort of not waiting for things to happen to you, but actually standing up and making it happen for yourself. So that's for me is an example of the desire to co-lead, is be prepared. Secondly, in the context of what Paki has said recently, just a moment ago, you can see the difficulties and the dynamics that are there. That should never be seen as a barrier iwi can't make their minds up, and I can understand that, but it should not be seen as a barrier not to face that challenge and to try and overcome it with structural solutions that can work, that actually don't impugn the hapu, that actually allows that voice to come through. When you suffocate the fundamentals of what it is to be Māori at the hapu level, you got a problem. So, but nobody's going to disagree with a cohesive approach that allows that to happen. So what we're trying to do in the context of the Bay of Plenty region and with respect to the Three Waters issue and particularly Entity B, is to try and galvanise that sense of cooperation at the core. Yes, we believe we need to work together. How the hell can we do that without impugning the hapu as well? So we're working on that right now, and I know that the conversations are happening with Tumu, Toby Curtis, and a number of others, actually just trying to making sure that, for example, Te Arawa are ready to prime themselves to have that conversation with our cousins from Mātātua. So we're looking to the challenge of being able to break down the barriers and enable us to work together. So we're not going to just give up, because to give up, I don't think anybody expecting us to give up, but it's easy to say that Māori can't get themselves together and look at the problem, so therefore we'll take them to go in our own direction. I know we're not saying that, but that is quite easily said by some others. So, and that's not what we want. So when we're talking about co-leading and cooperation and co-governance, we're talking about having iwi at the table that are prepared and are cohesive. We aren't there yet, but that's the journey that we're on, and I'm looking to engage with Te Arawa and then Mātātua with the support of colleagues around this table to make that happen. So fingers crossed we'll get there.
Councillor White.
Thank you for that explanation, Councillor White. If, with your indulgence, Mr. Chair, there's still two other questions I have. One is around the point about community champions. Who are they and how will they work? And also the Maori remuneration guidelines. What is that in relation to? Is that meeting fees, or is it resource consent reports? I'm just not clear.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. In terms of the community champions, in the draft community participation action plan, there's a proposal to onboard some community champions to bring on board members of the community to help inform some of our work. The detail around that again is still being worked through. So that's part of the community participation action plan. In terms of the Māori remuneration guidelines, in many aspects of our work, and if we take the freshwater engagement, we have to engage with Māori at different levels, from real kaitiaki practitioners through to mātauranga experts, through to iwi authorities, hapu landowners. And what we're looking at is a guideline for staff in terms of how you remunerate Māori in this space, bearing in mind that many of them are not consultants or contractors, and they are providing information to inform our work. So this is a new space for them, and we want to ensure that we respect their knowledge and remunerate them for their advice. So we are developing some guidelines for our staff for consistency that will be also in alignment with our social procurement strategy, our draft social procurement strategy. That's what that is.
So will that come to council for approval?
I'll talk to the chief executive. I don't see why it couldn't. It's a remuneration policy, a guideline for what we charge, similar to what we charge in our Section 36 policies and other policies. We can bring that to council. Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Councillor Nees for seeking clarification on those. I think it was great. Have we got anything?
Are there any other questions for this report?
I haven't got a question, just a statement. And just to thank the staff for the report that you've given us. It's certainly clearly showing us the diversity, the complexity of the landscape that we're having to traverse, and really taking on board for all of us the transformational changes that we spoke of earlier around changes on the Māori landscape. And, you know, while some of the information that's coming through from staff may be a bit alarming to some of us around the table, let's bear in mind that we are looking at transformational changes. And so, yeah, it is going to be challenging for not only staff, but those of us councillors around the table who may struggle with some of the requests that will come via staff to us. Bearing in mind, it is a new era, and we should all bear that in mind. And so, you know, once again, I want to thank the staff for bringing this to us and preparing us to move to another level and engaging and involving Maori. So, ngā mihi kia koutou.
All right, Councillor McDonald, I'd like to echo those sentiments and thanks to staff. Also, just a comment that, you know, as we talk about partnerships and the shifts and changes that we see across our country and that landscape and within our organisation, even within this own committee that we are currently meeting within, this is the kind of shift as we looked at the review and reform of the terms of reference of Committee Māori, that these kinds of meetings, that we're all sitting here at the table now, and that is partnership. And as we move through this work program, I would hope that the way that we report on the myriad of tasks that staff have to do back to this committee, I think that's definitely a development. I've spoken to Katarina about that. But thank you to staff and for this report around partnerships is really important. So could I please have a mover and a seconder to accept this report? So Councillor Clark, Chairman Leader second, for, against, carried. Kia ora. Okay. Wastewater update. This is a big kaupapa. We have Steve Pickles. Hey, Alex and Steve are going to present on this report. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Morena councillors. Yeah, thanks for giving us the chance to talk through this project and the progress we've got up to so far. So can I just check that you can all see the slides and you can all hear me?
Yep, we're looking good, Alex.
Brilliant. Okay. So many of you will be aware that for a number of years now, we've been working through different stages of a project to try and assist in a marae in addressing issues with on-site wastewater treatment. Most recently and most productively, this has been through a pilot project that happened in initially Tauranga Moana, but extended out to the Western Bay district, which has been really successful. Ultimately ended up working with Western Bay Plenty District Council, and 20 of the 23 marae in that district are now either have a solution in place or are actively working towards a solution with central government funding sourced by Western Bay. So up front, I think it's really clear to say that the intent of this project, or the goal of this project, is to secure safe wastewater and water supply for tangata whenua, manuhiri and the environment. So even though this is being led out of the compliance team, it's a broader council project and it's not being done with the stick, with the regulatory side of things. So following the success in the Western Bay, councillors obviously asked us to look at how we then expand this to a region-wide project and how we address those other marae outside of the Western Bay. Taking that, we went back to the drawing board and had a look at what we know about the status of marae across the region as they are, and identified that of, in terms of what sits in and out of the project to start with, it comes down to what we do or don't know about marae. So any marae that we know are either connected to reticulated wastewater or have a resource consent for their on-site system, we know that they're probably in a pretty good place. Any that we don't have that level of detail on, we have to kind of fall back to what we learned through the Western Bay project, which is that they're often on undersized and older systems that are at real risk of failure and overflows, particularly during big events such as Tangi. So we went back to our database, we had a look at the information we had, and what we found really was that the Western Bay is obviously now in a really good place for that. Rotorua through the reticulation projects for Rotoiti Rotama, plus a whole lot of funding that I believe Te Arawa sourced, post-COVID funding, a lot of the marae and the Rotorua constituency are in a good place or heading towards a good place in terms of their wastewater, which is really positive. But where we have the big gaps in our knowledge are in the Kohi constituency over to the east. And so we met with councillors McDonald, Iti and White and talked through what we'd found there and agreed that it was pretty common sense to take a look at how we can roll this out in Kohi first of all. Just zooming in on that, this is what the spread looks like across Kohi. So there's a few green marae, which unfortunately I probably should have chosen a colour other than green to sit against a green background, but the yellow ones are the ones that we need to know a little bit more about or would like to know a little bit more about in order to see if there's something we can't do to ensure that they do have that safe wastewater treatment and safe water supply. In terms of how we actually do that, I guess our first step is to take the learnings we got from the Tauranga Moana project. And a lot of that came down to the early engagement to really form up the project at the get-go. And that was really critical. So we've gone out and we've started talking to Whakatane and Opotiki district councils, and we appear to be really on the same page, and we're trying to look at this as a joint project between the three councils rather than an individual regional council project or even two council projects across the districts. But our goal is to try and join these up as a bit of a tripod. Alongside that, we've had obviously lots of discussions in-house amongst the many people within the organisation and also our Maori councillors to try and assist us with just how we go about this engagement. And I think a lot of that comes off the back of, again, the Western Bay project, where we learned that obviously it was really critical to go through marae trustees to deal with the marae, but obviously there's also the layers of the hapu and iwi dynamics and what role they want to play in that and how the best way to engage is. And what we've really learned through these conversations is that in the Kohi constituency, we're going to need to be really flexible and adaptable and engaged with marae in the way in which they want to be engaged with, and engage with iwi and hapu in the way in which they want to be engaged with. And that's going to require a different approach to the Far East and a different approach within the Whakatane catchments as well. So we have started some informal discussions with iwi and hapu as well to try and see where they sit on this. That includes particularly with Ngāti Awa and through Opotiki District Council to Whanua Apanui. And one of the big things we want out of this project is to incorporate some opportunities to build capacity. And initially our thinking was, can we look at having a member of the project team sourced from within iwi and hapu in these catchments to offer them an opportunity to learn a little bit about on-site wastewater and get some training and learn a little bit about council. And similarly, we've got a lot to learn as well. So we see that as something that really goes both ways. And the response to that from the other district councils and the iwi representatives that we've talked to has been really positive. So we're quite hopeful that we can do something in that space. And we've also put in some, we'll be looking at the annual plan process to seek funding for that as well. We expect that as we head out on this, some marae will be added into the project at different stages, and some will be fall out of the project as we sort of learn whether or not they're up to spec. And some of them out there we might know more about than we realise. They might be in a consent process already. And I guess the other really big point that we've picked up when it comes to Kohi is we need to understand that this one's going to take a little bit of time, and it's going to take a different approach, and we might actually be looking at different outcomes. Where in the Western Bay we were looking at a reasonably confined set of marae with reasonably simple opportunities to resolve the issues that they had on site, which was that reticulation was available, or there was a suitable on-site system and funding available, and servicing that looked to be viable. With a lot of the marae in these catchments, they're a lot more remote. Resourcing is different, and potentially some of the solutions might be more policy focused rather than system focused. So the first instance really is to go out to as many marae as we can, particularly through the Civil Defence He Tonga project, and start to just gain a better picture of what we can find in with these marae and how we can start working them towards a better outcome. And again, just underlining that point that the why of this is not to get compliance with an on-site effluent system plan, but it is to secure safe wastewater and water supply for those marae. So that was just meant to really be a brief introduction and summary of where we've got to at this point. There's a fair bit more detail in the report, but I'd be happy to take the rest of that as read and just be open to any questions to either Steve or myself, if councillors are happy with that.
Any questions? Then Councillor Thurston, Councillor Thurston.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question to you, Alex. In terms of the state of marae wastewater in this area, clearly it's good news for Rotorua in this area, but by my estimation on that diagram that you presented to us, there is 3 marae within the project scope, correct me if I'm wrong, at each sort of point of the district.
Yep, correct.
Are they being included, Alex, in the scope? Because I'd hate to think, because we think that bouquets should be tossed towards the Rotorua region because of marae wastewater progress, that we've overlooked 3 what could be critical marae.
Thanks, Councillor Thurston. Yes, that is the intention of this. Is it will capture those marae, but they won't be part of that same sort of coordinated project plan that's working with the broader council and tangata whenua in the eastern catchments. So with those ones, given that there's only the 3 of them, we can look at those individually.
Kia ora, Councillor Thurston. Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora, Alex. Just echoing the sentiments of the success of the project work in the Maori constituency. That was a great outcome. However, looking at the Koi one and seeing it as a bigger challenge, have you given thought, you're already working with the TLAs, and that's a logical step to take. Are we looking at any central government agencies to come on board to assist? And I'm thinking, the likes of TPK. That can help, because one of the beneficial things that came about in the Maori constituency project was around the funding that was able to be accessed by the Western Bay Community District Council. So although that was part of the TLAs, but I'm just wondering, given the funding that's around for marae restoration, whether we should also be talking to TPK to walk alongside us. The other project that I think that may be brought on board with this OSIT work too, given we're doing it as a precaution around the water, whether it should become part of our water project as well, because it's all around safety, water quality, whether we should be joining up some dots in there to be able to access funding for what's going to be required to provide OSIT systems to these marae that you've already identified, lacks the hookups to existing reticulation.
Sorry, classic one on mute. Thanks for that, Councillor McDonald. To address the first part of your question, yes, absolutely. We're looking at having central government involvement with this. There is a local Te Puna Kokiri office and representative, and we'll link them into the project. But I think one of the things that we kind of got out of the Western Bay project is that the funding streams need to look more broadly at central government as a whole. This is potentially a really big and really costly problem to resolve. And the marae order and marae restoration programs do have some limitations, so they might be viable as something for us to access, but what we get by joining up with WDC and ODC is we've got a pretty strong group of councils with access to different funding streams, and we'll be looking at all of those avenues as much as we need to. And in regards to the water program, yes, I certainly take that on board, and we'll have a look at how that integrates. Obviously, the other side of it is, as I mentioned, that one of the resolutions for this might be more of a policy resolution rather than necessarily a consenting pathway. So this will indefinitely link up with the inevitably link up with the review of the offset plan provisions as they go into the NPS plan revisions in 2024. Does that help to cover those points? Was there anything further on that?
Yeah, thank you for that, and I acknowledge your advice around our role being one around policy. But you know, for me, there is a greater need here, and I guess it's out the other end. It's the outcome that we want to achieve, and the outcome will be the asking of hapu iwi and those marae of, well, you know, how do we, at the end of the day, they want proper reticulation, proper offset systems. So while I acknowledge our role in the policy area, for me as a constituent Māori councillor, it's bigger for me to know, well, what actually, how do we get to the point of implementing so that the outcome for them at the end of the day is a system that they can use in the very near future and not, you know, 10, 20 years down the track.
Brilliant. Thanks, Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Councillor Von Paddleton.
Yes, look, first of all, a huge bouquet, Alex, to you and the staff and iwi actually for the work in the Western Bay. COVID gave us an opportunity to get funding for this project, which, you know, these are not small matters, and I think the outcome is really compelling. So well done, take a clap. The Eastern Bay still looks like a huge cash burden on somebody. And while we still have COVID rampant, I think we need urgency to see if we can't source funds through central government to get a good outcome for the Eastern Bay. So that means a partnership arrangement with the local councils and ourselves and iwi, marae, hapu, whatever it takes to get a compelling case. And there is urgency in this because the COVID funding won't last. And this is a bigger problem than a ratepayer can afford to pay for. So we need to be innovative, as you have been in the Western Bay. You need a good report for a start on the current state of the Eastern Bay marae for their wastewater. If you're going to have a compelling case to central government, where are you up to on that with regard to so that we can put a compelling case? Because, you know, the Western Bay did their case. It was a pilot project and it worked out exceptionally well. You know, can we look forward to you know, have you done the groundwork already, or do we still have to do it for these Eastern Bay marae? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Von Delson. The short answer to that is sort of yes, sort of no. The Western Bay project gives us a little bit of a platform to do that because we have some case studies that we can draw on and use as assumptions to test in the Eastern Bay. But whether or not that's a strong enough case for us to source funding right now, I don't know the answer to that. But again, I take your point on board and I guess reassure you that that's absolutely the goal of having the project joined up with the district councils to try and identify those streams. And if we can do that sooner rather than later to, I guess, have some security about a plan forward to resolve this with some resourcing behind it, that would be brilliant. So we'll continue to look into that.
Kia ora, Councillor Von Davidson. Any other questions of Alex and Steve? Kia ora, Councillor White.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for a pretty comprehensive report. Thank you for that. Just following on from Councillor Thurston, maybe I'm just being a bit fussy, but the 3 red dots on Okure that are within scope, what particular marae are those? I'm just interested, that's all.
I'm sorry, I don't actually have the full spreadsheet in front of me, Councillor White.
Okay, that's fine.
I can follow up with you with those
Yeah,
names.
please. I would like to know, so that within the networks, it's always, and you're going to be engaging in those spaces. I'm more than happy to help to make the connections.
Brilliant. Thanks, Councillor White.
Ka pai, kia ora koutou. So we have recommendations here. Could I have a mover and a seconder for those recommendations? Kia ora, Councillor White. Second, Councillor Running. All in favour, raise your hand. Against? Carried. Kia ora koutou. And thank you, Steve and Alex. Good luck with Kuhi.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our committee Maori. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure sharing this. It's really great to have everyone at the table to discuss these really important issues. So thank you all for being here. And I would just like to pass it over to Councillor White to close with the cake here. You're on mute, Councillor White.
I was offering you a silent karakia. Anyway. Ngā mihi kia koutou, e te tiamana me koutou hoki te komiti Māori me ngā memo o te kaunihira, e hui mai nei ki te tautoko te kaupapa o te rā. Me ngā kaimahi hoki me ngā memo o te hāpori, e tēnei rā, kei te mihi atu kia koutou. Just a brief karakia to close us off. Te tau ka tātou katoa, te atawhai tō tātou a riki a hukrai. Me te aroha te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu ake, 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 amen.